Welcome to the Grow My Salon Business podcast, where we focus on the business side of hairdressing. I'm your host, Anthony Whitaker, and I'll be talking to thought leaders in the hairdressing industry, discussing insightful, provocative, and inspiring ideas that matter. So get ready to learn, get ready to be challenged, get ready to be inspired, and most importantly, get ready to grow your salon business. Hey, it's Anthony here, and welcome to today's podcast. Today is the second in a series of podcasts that I'm doing where I'm talking with people that represent the trade media. I always find that the media representatives have an interesting insight into what's going on in the world of hair and beauty, and many of them also have a multi-purpose role, not just as publishers of magazines, but they also facilitate awards and various industry events. Now, in episode 173, which was the final episode of 2022, I spoke with Stacey Soble from Salon Today to get a North American perspective. On today's episode, my guest is Linda Woodhead. Now, Linda is the founder and owner of the Mocha Group, a multi-layered media company and publisher of magazines in the Australian hair, beauty and barbering space. And as well as that, they also facilitate events and awards in the hair and beauty industry. In today's podcast, we will discuss how the role of the hair and beauty media has evolved over the last few years, the impact that the internet and social media have had on traditional print media, and the trends around recruitment and the changes in industry events, and lots more. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Linda Woodhead.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
My pleasure. It's really good to have you here. I want to start off before we get into things, Linda. I have the pleasure of knowing you, but a lot of our audience outside of Australia will not know you. So can I get you to begin by giving us your sort of 2-minute backstory of how you got into the industry?
Yes, absolutely. Look, I've been in publishing my entire life, I think. I started in publishing when I was in my early 20s, actually back in the UK. Emigrated to Australia in 86 when I was 23, and worked with a couple of publishing houses over here, and then launched my first magazine, which was in the music industry. I had a street press weekly newspaper that was very hard work. I think weekly newspapers were hard work back then. So moved into that, then had a various number of different publications. I dabbled in the hair industry for somebody I knew that had a publication, and we looked after the print on license for that for the first few years. So I sort of got to know the industry, I guess, a long time ago, but launched my business that I currently have now, which is the Mocha Group, which is basically a media, marketing, events, publishing company for the hair, beauty and barber industry, with magazines, online, socials, EDM and all the rest of it that now comes with it, as well as 4 major awards for those those 3 industries. So okay. A small company, a boutique kind of business, that we assimilate very much with small business owners because we're one of them as well. So yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, I often think that the media side of the hairdressing industry has a really interesting insight or overview of what's happening in the industry as a whole. But like every business, the media has had to adapt a lot to changes, technology changes. And then over the last couple of years, COVID has had a further big impact on all that. But particularly the technology side of things, over the last 15 or 20 years, the internet and social media has had a huge impact on the publishing industry. So talk to me about how trade magazines, specifically your magazines, Hair Biz and the other magazines, have pivoted, because I know before we started recording, you mentioned that you were a publishing company, but very quickly it transitioned into a media company. So talk to us about what that means.
Look, I think we've had to evolve massively because of the changes obviously within media and the way that people can communicate. I think we also have to look at different generations as well, and the way that they communicate. We have a responsibility, I guess, as a trade, business to business company predominantly, even though, we are dealing directly with hair salon owners, beauty salon owners, barbershop owners. We've had to look at ways that we can communicate with them for our clients, and our clients predominantly are our advertisers, and those are product companies. Whether they are selling a product or a service, we need to communicate on their behalf through our media channels, because the industry has changed. And if we go back, and it's not that long ago, if we go back 15, 20 years ago, everybody just read magazines. It really has changed very quickly, whereas now people will get their information and their news from a myriad of different ways, whether that's social, whether that's email, whether that's a website, so for us to remain relevant and be able to still make a living, I guess, as well, we have to move with those changes, and we have to look at, probably more than most, how we can take responsibility for the money that people pay us to get a message out, and how we can best do that. My main aim is that if I have a company that I go to see, or any of my staff go to see, and they want to have a certain result within a certain period of time, we have to achieve that result and give them a return on their investment. And if we just had a magazine, print, that's not going to do it anymore, because we're dealing with a market that look at all sorts of different areas, and will, I think it's not a new concept to me. It's a little bit like when I first started in publishing, and you used to go and see somebody to try and sell them advertising. You used to talk to people about how people would spend money in print, in radio, in TV, in flyers in mailboxes, all the old-fashioned direct mail things. And so people did spread their budgets in different ways. Nothing's really changed. It just means that they're now spreading their budget across different media channels, because we now have the ability to do that through the internet and through websites and through emails and through socials. So for us to stay current and relevant, and still get budget, basically, it comes down to having to offer all of those mediums to everyone, and learn about that too, because this is something that it was new to everyone. We've all had to learn it. Young people have kind of grown up with it. We haven't. We've had to, I think the world at the moment is such a huge changing place, probably bigger than I've ever seen before, whether it comes to technology, whether it comes to humanity, whether all those different things that we're all learning. But I guess the bottom line is to stay in business, you have to evolve, and that's what we've had to do, to make sure that we've got all of those channels for everyone to get the content from. Okay,
you very consciously have talked about different generations and young people, and it occurs to me that in this industry you have two very different audiences, that you have the business owners, the manufacturers, etc., that you deal with, the salon owners, and they will generally be of one generation, whereas more and more so the majority of this industry it's always been a young person's industry. So more and more so you're going to be dealing with Gen Z, that they are also your market. Although they may not be the market that are spending money with you today, they will be the market that are spending more money with you tomorrow. So I suppose what I'm thinking about as you're talking about that is, in terms of magazines, do you think that young hairdressers today have lost interest in magazines because they're now more interested in the spontaneity and the instant thing that social media brings to the game? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Look, I think number one, I think salon owners, even though we are very much and always have been about talking to business salon owners are getting, we're getting older, but they're definitely getting younger. I think people are, and that's now kind of in a good way. I think they are becoming a lot more savvy than what they used to be. we can see how well the business is going, because when we send our magazines out, we get those returns back for closures of salons. And so it's quite an interesting way to look at how business is going in general. Hair has always been a lot higher than beauty, for example. Hair, on average, there's about a 10 to 12% churn rate. So 10 to 12% of salons will close down pretty much every year. I think up until about maybe 5-6 years ago, we were still growing. We're not really growing much anymore, because the same amount that are closing are coming back in as new ones, or they're being taken over or whatever. Beauty has always been probably closer to about 6 to 7%, so it's less. But I think that's also because the business owners, even though they are also still seeming to be younger, you need to have a lot more money to open up a beauty salon nowadays, because they are more of a clinic. They have, equipment that costs $100,000 plus. So it's not just opening up a $20,000 salon. It's like, this is kind of big business. Barbers definitely got hit hard through COVID, because I think when we here, I'm not sure what happened in other countries, but we were restricted on how many people they could have in their shops and salons. When you're dealing with $25 to $50 per head, and you can only have 3 people in there as opposed to 10, that makes a massive difference. So we saw a bit of a decline, but that's now kind of come back up again. I think for me, with the message to the age and generation of people, is a lot of the salons that we're talking to from a business perspective, they are salons that, not all of them, but they are salons that are really nurturing their staff. We have our awards as well, and we have categories in those awards for young people, for apprentices, for new creative talent, and I think that at the end of the day, the salon owner is the person that's going to spend the money, and therefore my advertisers want to get to them. So I have to do my job of that. But at the same time, I'm also having to send messages to younger people, because they are the salon owners of the future, and also they are our entrants to our awards, and they are growing. We have a couple of young competitions. One's called Hot Shots for hair, and one's called Beauty Squad for beauty, and that's very much about really nurturing the young ones into a different kind of thought process, I guess. I mean, I think everyone talks about skill shortage, everyone talks about how hard it is to get staff. I don't think I've ever not heard that conversation in the 20 years that we've had this business. That isn't changing. I think there are quite bad figures over here for not so much the number of apprentices that are coming in, but the ones that are completing. I think people are changing their way of thought with who they employ. But I do think when it comes to print, at the moment, from what we can see and from what research we do, which is purely based on, telemarketing to salons, and that could be somebody could pick up the phone who's a receptionist, not necessarily the business owner, and we ask the question, do you still want to get the print magazine? Because if they all said no, it would save me a fortune. I mean, we would probably have to charge a bit less in advertising, but if we went fully online, we wouldn't have print, we wouldn't have post. But it's a resounding 100% yes, we still want to see the magazine.
But that's the owners. Is that the owners or the staff, or you think both?
It's whoever answers the phone. We normally ask them straight away, and then we will say to them, if you can speak on behalf of the owner, or we will ask to speak to the owner. But when I personally go into salons and looking at, even just when we do stories, like, when we put out a magazine, we also have a digital online version. So we send that out on our email database. So that, so for hair, for example, that goes to like 14,000, 15,000. For beauty, it goes to around 10 to 12,000. And even though, I think we were talking before we started sort of the podcast, our open rates are good, but when you look at how many people actually look at the magazine, a lot of people go to the online version to look at it. And they're on there for a reasonable amount of time in terms of impression and how long they spend on a page and that kind of thing. But it's not huge. The percentage is quite low. If you think about how many people that goes out to, we find that if we do a story in the magazine and then we share that link to that page, to the person that we've written about, and that could be about somebody young, it could be about somebody 20, 21, 22, and we've done an interview with them about their career path or whatever, they will share that link. And quite often it's funny because even though they may be the ones that are embracing social more so than the older ones, because they share it, we get more hits on that than we would do on maybe a 50-year-old business owner who might share it, because they don't have the following.
Sure.
So it's kind of weird because it works quite well on either way. I'm sure that there are young hairdressers and beauty therapists out there that, may not be interested in looking at the magazine. But then, like I said, our magazines have always been more so about the business owner. Our other content creation, which is through social, and that's more for the young ones. So if we go to a salon and do a bit of a walk through a salon and we make it a reel, and we make it really cool and fun, and a lot of that for us in terms of a business strategy means that we are also all over socials. So I'm currently getting phone calls. We've been really, it's been a very big focus. I brought in a new general manager in August, and he's had a huge focus and an influence, I guess, in what we've been doing lately. And he's younger. It's much more about, talks about eyeballs all the time and all that kind of stuff. And what's happening with that is that I'm getting calls from companies that we haven't done business with for a long time who are ringing saying, oh my God, you're just everywhere. We need to be a part of that train kind of thing. So
how many issues do you do a year of the magazine?
We've got 16 in total. So hair biz is 6 a year, beauty biz is 6 a year, and barbershop is 4 a year. And that's been the case ever since we launched.
Right. So that's
essentially we're putting out absolutely not. In fact, even through COVID, through the few 2 years, I guess, where things were pretty bad, and Melbourne is a classic example. Victoria was like one of the highest lockdown cities in the world. A lot of salons suffered, especially beauty, in that because they were locked down for longer than hair. I think even throughout the entire COVID situation, we only didn't publish one magazine, and that was a beauty biz edition. And that was because it was just tough. And we didn't not publish because we did research. I never kind of just think that I'm right, because I love print, but I'm not going to stick my head in the sand if people don't want it. It's a business decision. But when we spoke to a lot of people and said, are you still getting your mail? Yes, they were, even though their salons might be closed. Do you still want to get the magazine? Oh my gosh, yes, because it's the only way that we can get all the information. And they still wanted to feel part of that industry, and they looked forward to receiving it. From the product company point of view, none of the reps were on the road, so they really had very little way to communicate other than through media companies. So the fact that we could then say, and look, we looked after them as well. We did a lot of free stuff over the year or two to try and kind of keep people, going and communicating, and offered as much as we could. We did sort of podcasts, we did lives, we did all sorts of different things, because we were still operating. Yeah, they weren't. So it allowed us to be a voice for the people that couldn't be a voice in that 1 to 2 year period.
Sure. Do you see a day where there won't be printed magazines?
I hope not.
It's said in the Australian market that you haven't shrunk at all. That you've been very consistent.
Not at all.
So I'm just curious about that, because I sort of imagine the staff room of 20 years ago, that the magazine arrived and it would be put on the staff room table and everyone would rip the cover off and want to flick through it and look at it. But I'm imagining the staff room of today is got these young hairdressers in it that are scrolling through their phone when they don't have a client, and the instantaneous interaction with what they're seeing on Instagram is more important and maybe even more relevant to them than the magazine. So, I mean, obviously I don't know, it's just in my imagination. I'm sort of picturing that that's what staff rooms would be like. So I'm intrigued about why you're not seeing that as something more in the future.
I think it's just I don't think there's one rule that fits all, to be honest. I mean, I think there would be some salons that probably, you know, would get it. The business owner would get the magazine, take it home. The staff wouldn't even see it. And they're happy with that. And my advertisers are happy with that because that's who they want to get to. But then on the other hand, I think that there are other ones that, you know, I think we write off, you know, the Gen Z, the Gen Y, that a lot of those as being this instantaneous kind of, you know, not interested kind of group. But in actual fact, the ones that, you know, we've got some salons that we deal with quite closely who themselves, I'd say Gen Y, and they might employ Ys and Zs and get so much out of them as long as they deal with them in the right way. So if they nurture them and they take them along for the ride and they support them in, you know, shoots or education or mindfulness sessions in the morning, I mean, whatever they do, it's kind of, you know, they've had to evolve as well. So I think I don't know what happens in the staff room anymore. All I know is that advertisers are still using us as a medium and they're getting results for that. So somebody's got to be reading it. I think but having said that, we can't just go into somebody now and say, you know, book 6 full pages and it's going to cost you X amount, and, you know, and that's going to be great for your brand. They're very much more about return on investments. I mean, also because a big change in media has been, and I mean, that's because I'm older now, but the marketing managers that we're dealing with in some of the larger companies are young. And they're coming out with, you know, what they want out of a contract, what they want to see, how many eyeballs they want to get, what the followers are going to be, what, you know, so all this stuff, they speak in acronyms all the time. Like it's a whole different language. So you have to kind of be on their level, I guess, and understand what they want out of that. But also, I believe that we also have, you know, we have to do our own kind of due diligence, and we have a responsibility that if someone's going to give me some money to do something for them, I've got to do it the right way. So you know, we can offer them I guess by having all of these different media channels, we can offer a lot. And look, a lot of the young ones that I'm seeing and I'm dealing with, we have a lot of young, as I said, competitions and you know, programs that we run. They're just hungry for information. They and they will quite often comment on a story that they read. You know, I think definitely in media. I mean, I've been involved in publishing for a long time, so I've seen a lot of changes. Obviously, from a production point of view, when I first got involved in it, we were still doing hand manual cut and paste there was no desktop publishing. And so that's changed massively. There are industries now that just don't exist, that used to exist in the way that we used to publish. So that tends to tell me that, yeah, things are definitely evolving and things are definitely changing. However, I do also think that, you know, media has become such a broad thing, and sometimes you just have to give people what they want. And everybody at the moment in a media contract with a media company, they want us to give them everything. And that's been hard. That probably has been the toughest challenge I would say I've had in business, because, you know, we were trucking along for quite a long time, you know, doing what we do. And then suddenly in the last probably only maybe 5-6 years, we've had to suddenly, you know, create email databases out of nothing and create social media pages. And then, you know, when probably a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, we had something like 14 different Instagram accounts and Facebook accounts, because when we started, nobody really knew what was happening. So we would have, you know, one for each magazine and one for each award and one for all different things. And so we had to make a very big decision 12 months ago and say, look, let's rebrand. My company used to be called Mocha Publishing. It's now called Mocha Group. We wanted to move away from just being seen as a publisher even though that's essentially what we are. We got rid of a lot of our Instagram and Facebook. So then Mocha was the brand we wanted to promote. So we put a lot of those together, and we now just have 3: Mocha Hair, Mocha Barber, and Mocha Beauty. And whether it's awards, competitions, social events, networking, magazine stuff, anything, it just goes under those 3. And that's a lot easier to manage.
I'm always thinking of it from the hairdresser's perspective, me trying to have an overview of what's happening at the salon level. And when I go back to to my day behind the chair, entering awards, doing photographs, all that sort of stuff, it was very much about, you really wanted to get your work in print. There was nothing better than seeing your picture on the cover or double page spread inside. It was a real endorsement of who you are and what you did. And one of the interesting things about social media is it's enabled a lot of people to break through, because there was no one vetting their work. There was no one saying you're good enough or not good enough. And that's been a really powerful thing about Instagram in particular, that anyone can take pictures of the work they do, they can put it out there, and so they get a lot of endorsement and a lot of recognition from the amount of likes and followers and whatever that they get for their work that they're putting out there. And so I'm wondering, from that perspective, again, getting back to young people and magazines, are they less interested? And I want to talk to you about awards in a minute, because I know you have awards and events that you do. Are young people today less interested in awards as being their recognition, because they get their recognition from the wider field through social media and have total control over it? What are your thoughts about that?
I think there's 2 different types of recognition. There's consumer recognition from their clients, and then there's peer recognition. And with not all of them, but with some of them, and I don't think this has ever really changed, there is a group, and there will always be a group in my mind, that yearn that peer recognition. Peer recognition then comes in a couple of different ways. One is obviously to get recognition amongst your peers as to the work that you're doing. If we're talking photographic, the work that they do for competitions is very different to the work that they're going to quite often put up on socials of the work they're doing in the salon. So if they're really proud of an amazing balayage or something look that they've done, they put that up and they get all their followers and they get all their likes. And if they own a salon and people come to the salon because of that, that's one thing. But when they get peer recognition, it's almost like then somebody saying to them that they are an artist, they are incredible at what they do, and with that can quite often then come a lot of other accolade. So it's not just about, wow, that looks great. It's about, yes, that's great, you've become a finalist, you've won an award. You quite often then through that can become a commodity, which means that you can earn more money because you then have interest from product companies. I know a lot of salons that use things like awards even instead of recruitment budget, because then they make it look so amazing that they want people to go, oh my God, I'd love to go work for them. Look at what they do. That's crazy. They're at Fashion Week, or they're at, so I think industry recognition is a very different game to consumer recognition for a salon, and both are equally important to the other, but not everybody is equally interested in both. But there is still definitely a place. I think that those creatives, and there will always be those creatives, because there are salons already that are creative and they nurture their staff to be the same, and then you get your odd ones that kind of come out of nowhere that are just incredible in terms of creatives, and usually hopefully will find themselves in a salon that will support that side of things as well. They are the ones that still want to see themselves on a front cover of a magazine, or in a 6-page spread, or because that is then almost the ultimate for them. I think it's definitely a case of it's not one or the other. because we've got, I could name some salons over here that don't enter awards, that have incredible social platform, that are very successful salons. Although sometimes they do tend to then enter our business awards because they can show how well they do with business, but they're not necessarily the ones, doing the photo shoots. And I think as well, there is that, I guess it touches on then the ego side of the industry, which is to show that you have had a hand somewhat in, forecasting hair fashion trends. And that's a big thing. And I think, it's the same as, I guess, in any kind of situation, whether it be fashion, whether it be hair, if it's trend based, music is the same. There have to be trailblazers in that. And those are the people, because they're creatives, that may still love what they do in the salon on a daily basis, but also want to really push the boundaries when it comes to creative. And those are the ones that still love to see themselves in print. And, look at some of the product companies, they'll run competitions where they'll have, salons can enter to, create a shot so that company can then use those shots in their marketing. And, I think there is still, it comes down to marketing, it comes down to merchandising. But yeah, there's a lot of different aspects, I think, as to why people would do a shoot. I've always said to people that if you're going to do a shoot, then, entering an award is one thing, obviously, and we love that because we have the awards. But at the same time, you've also got to look at how else you can use that shoot. Can you use it in your marketing? Can you use it in your merchandising? Can you make it really pay for itself? Because everything ultimately has to still come back to getting bums on seats in the salon if you're a business owner. And if you're just starting out as a creative, then the ones, when you talk to the top creatives in this industry, they all started just kind of handing bobby pins to somebody else. So exactly. I think there's there's different groups within this industry, in hair especially, and I think there always probably will be. As to whether or not print will see the distance, I can't see it changing massively in the foreseeable future. I think that if you have print magazines that are time-based, so newspapers, things that have, the magazine I first launched over here, which was called Rave, which was a street press music magazine, that's now gone. Because it had a gig guide, and that's what most people, used to go to their record store to pick it up and see what bands were playing where for that week. You just pick up your phone to do that now. So the person that ended up owning that did not want to go digital, and it subsequently closed. Whereas I think for magazines like us, generally speaking, it might have some stuff in there about events, but generally you could pick up that magazine at any time and read it and be interested by what's in it. So it's not time-based.
Okay.
And I think that makes a massive difference.
Yeah. Well, I know that you've touched on events a couple of times, and I know that your business is also heavily involved in the events side of things. Tell us about what the different events are that you put on, and how they're evolving as well, because events are changing. So, what are the changes that you're seeing in putting in events on, and how they're being impacted by technology? Because, for example, during COVID, a lot of events sort of became online events with varying degrees of success. So tell us about your event side of your business.
So we have 4 awards that cover all 3 areas. Our first one was the Beauty Awards, Australian Beauty Industry Awards, the ABIAs. We launched those predominantly because there were no awards in the beauty industry. I'd had some involvement in awards in the past, and to be honest, we just had a lot of people come to us saying, can you do some awards? Because they didn't really have anything national. So we went to Beauty Expo one year and put together a bit of an idea of categories. I wanted to make sure that the categories were all individually sponsored, so there was not one major company, so it became a very collective event. I didn't actually know if it was going to come off, but we went and saw a few companies and said, look, would you be interested in sponsoring? And by the end of the 2 days at Beauty Expo, we'd sold every single category. We didn't even have an awards at that point. So then I had to kind of lock myself away and create the beauty awards. The next one were the hair ones. We used a lot of, we had the beauty ones for a couple of years before we launched the hair business ones. And I did the business ones pretty much the same reason that we did hair biz. I felt that, you know, at the time there was Hair Expo Awards and there was AHFAs, and they were both dealing just with creative. Nobody was really looking at the business side, and business was my sort of forte, and the magazine was very much more business based. And just felt that it would open it up to a lot of other salons that were running incredible businesses to have that award program. So we launched the AHIAs. 2 years ago, we took over from Hair Expo and took over the Hair Expo Awards so that we could have the creative awards. And at the same time, we also launched the Australian Modern Barber Awards. So I guess the creative ones were kind of the final piece in the puzzle. The barber ones are a bit of a mixture of the two. So barber, we have creative categories and business categories. It's a much smaller industry, so you can very easily kind of combine the two. I guess we run them a little bit differently. They are run online, and obviously anybody can enter. But one thing that we do that I think is unique to us, and probably our big point of difference, is how much time and effort we put into after the awards for our finalists and for our winners. So I've never wanted to just set up an awards program and, you know, have an amazing big night and everybody have a great time and give them the trophy, and the trophy goes on a shelf and just gets dust and that's it. That's not what I'm about. What we try to do is to make sure that everybody gets as much publicity as they possibly can as part of their prize package. So we have a PR company that we work with who's on contract to us 12 months of the year, who works pretty much solely on getting PR for our winners. So in turn, it means that whether we get them on, you know, breakfast TV the following day, or whether we get them into a newspaper, online or print, or if we get them various other opportunities, it's a huge investment for us. But it's also, you know, it's not just about, you know, every single winner gets their own personalized press release. They get like a how to get PR, kind of like a, you know, 101 sort of thing. We give them lists and details of local media in their areas. We really try to work them through showing them how to put a press release together, all that kind of stuff. So it's not just enter the awards, win the award, see you later until next year. We work with them quite closely and give them as much publicity in trade as well as in consumer. So that was partly one of the driving forces, I think, behind, and certainly from that, I think because people see what we do with that, then the award programs are all definitely growing.
Yeah. So your events are all about awards. There's no trade fair, so to speak.
No. So basically, when Hair Expo closed, we took over the awards, and Intermedia, who owns InStyle, they took over Hair Festival, which is called now, and that is a trade show. We kind of came at that together. I'd been speaking to Reed, and we were kind of in the process of us looking at taking over everything. I didn't really want to do the trade show. I just wanted to do the awards. Intermedia popped up and said that they'd be interested in the trade show. So we kind of came together.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that trade show side of things, because I'm intrigued by that as well. As, you know, we've both been in the industry a long time. And one thing that's been happening over the years, many years, is that trade fairs have just been getting smaller and smaller and smaller because of the internet. And pre-COVID, you always sort of got the feeling that no matter where you were in the world, that the trade event was getting smaller and looking for ways to sort of reinvent itself. And now we've come out the other end of COVID. There's that sort of, you know, are they going to continue in the way they were? Is there still a need for them? Lots of people seem to be stepping back a little bit from those, you know, big events, award events, education events, you know, trade fairs, and looking for a new way forward. What are your thoughts about that? What do you see happening?
I agree. I absolutely agree. I think Hair Expo used to be a 3-day trade show. It was pretty big. It was across 2-3 halls or whatever. Hair Festival came on board with Intermedia. They've only had one, so they were supposed to launch in 2021, and then because of COVID issues, they didn't do 21. So they really only launched in this year in 2022. They will be back in 2023. We always have our creative awards on the last night. We didn't cancel actually in 2021, and we were super lucky because we had it in a window in June on the weekend where Melbourne just got out of lockdown like 3 days before, and then Sydney went in about 4 days after. So we just snuck in this little window, but still had a huge event, amazing event. And I think that was more to do with the fact that a lot of people hadn't seen each other for over a year, so everyone was super excited to get together. Hair Festival was a little bit different. It was in a different venue. It was at Carriage Works in Sydney, which is, as it sounds, an old carriage works, like an old railway kind of works, and it was kind of had that cool vibe sort of about it. There was education. There were certainly stands. There were, I think, probably the biggest takeaway difference would be, the big names are not necessarily there anymore. If you look at the big 4 or 5 companies, they definitely are doing things differently. They were all there but didn't necessarily have a stand. They probably they did a few things differently, where they had a day which was a bit more seminar conference style, and some of the major product companies kind of supported that. So they still supported it in a different way, but without an actual stand. And I think that's where things have changed. It has also opened it up to some of the smaller brands that definitely did support and be there. But I think, and look, it's not my business, but I think they're going to have to continuously evolve and reinvent and look at different ways that they can do things. But, they still got decent numbers. I think it was just, they've only had the one, I guess, over here. But I think, the days of, for us, sort of, 12,000 people coming in through a couple of days, and, massive exhibition stands, and, of the big companies and all the wholesalers and all the rest of it. And I remember even walking around Salon International, like that style thing. I think that's definitely changed. Education, I think, is a tough one because, everybody has been quite spoiled in the last couple of years of getting a lot of education and a lot of free education online. So that's become, I think, difficult. However, there are still people that I think also it's the opposite way, where some people have been so starved of human interaction in the last couple of years. Some people are like, can't wait to get back out and get some real, face-to-face education. Because what I'm seeing at the moment, certainly, the individual educators are all back up and running and doing well. It's probably the bigger ones are tough. We used to run an event called Hairbiz Forum. We haven't run it for the last couple of years, obviously, because of COVID. The jury's still out at the moment as to whether we will bring it back. We probably won't bring it back in the format that we used to do it. We ran it for a good 7 or 8 years. It was basically a live version of the magazine. So we would have a full day. We would always have a headline act that would come out from the UK, as in hair creative, that would do, show on stage. But we used to mix it up. So we would usually have 3 business speakers, 3 hair shows, maybe a team or maybe an interview situation. So it was very much like the magazine, to be honest, but just a live version of that. But the last one that we did, even though we used to get good numbers, it's a huge amount of work. And from a commercial point of view, for very little return. And there's only so much you can do. It's like, from a sponsorship point of view, as far as what a company gets, I guess, with the awards compared to what they get with education, and this is, I don't know, a bone of contention, I guess. awards, they get a lot longer bang for their buck because we do a lot of stuff before. They've got the night, they've got the after, they've got all the photos, they've got all that kind of stuff. But to get product companies nowadays to spend money on education is quite hard unless it's on their own. Yeah. I think at the moment they're all very much wanting to look after the clients they've got initially, first and foremost, and that's taken precedent over getting new. I mean, obviously they're all still trying to get new ones as well, but for us, we needed sponsorship and we got the sponsorship, but when you're talking about putting on 4 or 5 shows with models and with everything else, and then also you have business speakers, and we used to have the little stands for all the sponsors, and we'd have anywhere between 300 to 500 people in the room. It would take 6 months lead up. It was a massive 2-3 days, and then on the night we would have the business awards.
You mentioned, before we start to wrap up, I just want to touch on a couple of things to get your perspective, because again, as I said at the beginning, I think that someone in your position has a good overview of what's happening in the industry from lots of different perspectives. And so I want to ask you about recruitment, and you touched on it already, and you said something which I would agree with, but I think maybe it's got worse, and that is that there's always been recruitment problems. I think right at the beginning of my career, there definitely wasn't. There was quite the opposite, but we're talking at the end of the 70s, and there was a lot of kids that wanted to get into hairdressing, and it was this, it was a transition period into salons that were, and I hate this term, but the unisex salon, because before that it was the barber and the beauty salon, and now we've gone back again to sort of segregating the two largely, which I think is a really good idea. But at that point in time, there was a lot of people queuing up to get into this industry, and for a long time it hasn't been like that. So what I wanted to ask you about was, what are the trends that you're seeing around recruitment? Are you seeing anything interesting that's happening to, try and solve that problem at a salon level or at a national level?
Possibly the one change that we've seen in the last few years would be the employment of salon assistants more so than apprentices coming in. There's some pretty alarming figures of apprentices and how many don't complete their apprenticeship. I think sometimes they start, but they just don't always stop. And so there's definitely been a shift. I mean, I know quite a few salons that have still got their core staff of their qualified, stylists, but then what they will do is that they will then employ salon assistants who will come in and do, I guess, and it works twofold. They'll still have apprentices, but they will employ salon assistants, and those assistants will do the stuff that maybe a first year used to do. They can teach them how to wash hair, they can, they can be the tea and tidy, they can do all that stuff, which then also means that they can put more time into their apprentices, actually training them how to do hair, rather than for the first year just doing nothing. And subsequently, I think in some cases why some of them leave, because they don't love it, so they try and maybe
so just to be clear,
get them to love it earlier on.
So just to be clear, when you're talking about assistants, you're talking about assistants that don't intend to be hairdressers. They are just assistants.
Quite often, some of them, I think some of them, some of them may well go on to deciding that they may want to have an apprenticeship, but there are also there's also a lot of people out there that are looking for work that may not look for full-time work. We've got one of the things that started not long ago, which Clive Allwright started up over here, which is a thing called Pillaroo, and basically it is an online kind of thing where they, it's face-to-face as well, but they will bring people in, they will train them, they will give them a period of time to train them to be a salon assistant. And if you get to work and suddenly find that 2 of your staff are off, then you can get in touch with them and you can get a salon assistant to come into the salon. So it's to help with that. Quite often they can be overseas students, they can be they can have other jobs. You might get somebody who's a doctor that just wants, instead of, they don't want to go and drive an Uber for, 3 nights a week, but they'd be quite happy to work on a Saturday or maybe after hours in a salon, because they can still get paid and they can, so that's something that is new. It's not everywhere. but it's definitely something that is changing, where people are employing non-hairdressers in a hair salon. That certainly can't really happen in beauty, obviously, because that's not going to work, because they need their qualification. But in terms of just some basic stuff that's happening, I think the suite situation that we always talk about, there are some companies that have suites in different states here. It's not huge. There is a little bit of a some people are now looking at working in salons as sole operators, rent a chair, all that kind of stuff. I remember talking to a few people from the US maybe 4 or 5 years ago saying, oh, it's going to come to Australia, it's going to be everything's going to be rent a chair, and that hasn't happened. And I don't think it will in Australia, but it's definitely there. It's just not maybe grown as quickly as what some people thought it would. There are suites, definitely, where sole operators, I think one of the biggest areas that we have is the number of sole operators has grown. Some have incredibly amazing salons at their homes or, wherever. And it's quite a big market that we're having to look at. We introduced a category actually called best sole operator, which was a new one 2 years ago, which some people didn't love the idea of, but we make sure that they have to meet criteria. They have to have a premises of sort. They have to put pictures of that up. They have to be ABN registered, which means they need to have a registered business name with the taxation office. So, we're not trying to get backyard ones. We do want bona fide ones, but I think there's more people doing that. A lot of people have got used to working from home, so they're kind of doing that. Maybe that's partly down to why we have shortage, but there's a change. It's a bit of a wave, but it certainly isn't, oh my God, in 2 years' time, 50% of the industry is going to be salon suite or rent a chair. That's not happening yet. Okay. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but it's not. I don't think it's been adopted as quickly as it has in other countries.
Right. Okay. Let me ask you this question. When you look outside the Australian market, what do you see that is happening in other countries that you wish the Australian market, in terms of the hairdressing industry, would adapt more? Is there anything?
It's hard to look at different countries and try and compare, because Australia is it's such a unique country. The distance, for one thing, it's all very well saying let's put on some education, because everybody can get to us within 2 to 3 hours, even if they're on a train, if they're in the UK. Whereas with us, if they're coming from Perth, they got to fly for 6 hours. I mean, it's logistically, I don't think you can really compare it. I think that I guess we're very much onto our own, which isn't really answering your question, but I look at other countries all the time to see what they're doing. And I think that we are definitely kind of holding our own. I think from a creative point of view, we've always been seen to be kind of up there as well. I see the way that the US has moved, I guess, more so in but their whole system with employment has always been so different to us anyway. So I think that, sometimes I think some salon owners feel that they can be a bit restricted because there are lots of laws around what they have to do and how much they have to pay and all those things. And maybe a bit of flexibility would be good, but at the same time, it also protects the employee, and I don't think that's a bad thing either. I think probably one of the issues, and I don't know how this relates to overseas, is that a lot of the time, all those additional benefits that we have to pay to an employee because of award rates, because of all those different things, can put a lot of pressure on any salon owner. And I think they get, the small business owner in Australia definitely gets hammered a lot. And after COVID, that's the worst thing that you can possibly do. So no, I don't really look overseas. I mean, like I said, I went to the awards. I went to the British Hairdressing Awards, and there were certainly a few things there that I really liked that I will adopt. I love the fact that they brought everybody out on stage and all the finalists got their round of applause and their 2 seconds of fame kind of thing. And we don't really do that. So that was one thing. There was a few things that I loved. There was a few things that I didn't. And so yeah, I'll always look at what everyone else is doing. But from a business perspective, I think it's trying to, look at apples and pears. Right. We're so different over here because of our distance and our employment laws that make things easier in some way, but also can put a lot of pressure on the business owner in another.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, we need to start wrapping up. It's been really interesting talking with you. Whereabouts can people connect with you on Instagram or other social media channels?
Probably the easiest, because all of our links are on our website. So our website is mochagroup.com.au.
Mocha Group.
Yep, just like the coffee. So the website is www.mochagroup.com.au. Our socials are the same, whether it's Facebook or whether it's Instagram. We have Mocha Hair, Mocha Beauty, and Mocha Barber, but all of those links are on our website as well as details for how to get in touch with us in any way.
Okay, well, I will put those links on our website, growmysalonbusiness.com, and in the show notes for today's podcast. If you're listening to this podcast with Linda Woodhead and have enjoyed it, then do me a favor, take a screenshot on your phone, share it to your Instagram stories, and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcast app. So, to wrap up, Linda, thank you ever so much for being on this week's episode of the Grow My Salon Business podcast.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, actually. It's been lovely. Good to see you again. I think I'm going to see you later this year as well. You'll be down under, I gather. I
am. I think in June. Yes. So I will look forward to that.
Awesome. Oh, well, you can come to the awards. My guest.
There you go. Thanks again.
Good to chat. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you'd like to connect with us, you'll find us at growmysalonbusiness.com or on Facebook and Instagram at growmysalonbusiness. And if you enjoyed tuning into our podcast, make sure that you subscribe, like, and share it with your friends. Until next time, this is Anthony Whitaker wishing you continued success.